What is yoga?
To interview 100
That we all find yoga
their story.
because we're
Their
friends.
story is your story.
Untitled Yogi with motorcycle bikes, riding with cameras cross country. Snap a couple pics, take a couple flicks, documents of people tell an interesting story. No time for resting, no time for slacking. Get the cameras rolling, it's time for some action. Now everybody buckle down, it's time for the story. Who's up next on the Moto Yogi? Moto Photo Yogi. It's the Moto Photo Yogi.
And we are back, I think.
All right, so this is episode 3.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty exciting stuff of the 100 Yogis project, where I am attempting to interview 100 yogis to answer a few questions. What the big question is, what is yoga? We'll come to that one later on. So
Okay.
I am here.
Thought I was supposed to answer right away.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
No, let that one marinate for a little bit. So I'm here with Keli Lalita, right? Am I pronouncing that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. I have a thing about butchering people's names. I do it all the time.
Oh, no, that's right.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure for the posterity's sake. So tell me about yourself. So you have a really cool story. How you grew up, where you grew up, like how long you've been you've basically been in the yoga community your entire life, right?
Well, so my mom was and I always say and is a hippie.
Yeah.
So where I grew up was near these like places that used to be resorts that are like in the movie Dirty Dancing, which I've said before, but I don't know how else to describe it, and it's the only way most people know what they are. And they might have them in the Adirondacks and they have them in the Catskills, but I don't think they have them a lot of other places.
Those like resort. I mean, I know
It's called a resort, and it used to be that they have this like, or sometimes they were called a boarding house, and they have like a big main house, and then they have these like hotel rooms, and then they have like this all-inclusive. It was like an all-inclusive place, like in the 30s and 40s, and I think sometimes in the 50s, and they had like shuffleboard, and everybody would eat in the dining hall, and people still went to them in the 70s, but I think by the 70s, most people it kind of wasn't fashionable anymore. And so the different ashrams began buying the resorts and turning them into American ashrams. And the one that I grew up near was called Vivekananda Vedanta Vihar. So disciples of Swami Vivekananda.
Okay.
And Swami Vivekananda is the Swami who people are familiar with, was at the 1896 World's Fair. And he was the one that actually we got our concept of his version of Hinduism, like informed our American concept of what Hinduism was for a very long time. And my mom just kind of made friends with the ashram people because she was sort of a back to the land hippie. And most of the other people in the town were not in that category. And so I think she kind of gravitated toward them and they toward her. And so one of the women used to come down to our house and teach my mom's friends yoga. And so they would, just like in A Clockwork Orange, when the women's doing yoga, like in a one-piece leotard, like a dance skin leotard, that's what my mom used to do. They would put on these like body suits, and which is so funny to think that's what they did yoga in, and they would do sun salutations, and I would see them. And my mother's friend, who's named Pat Fogel, she would go to India, and there was a Swami there, and they would go to India with him. And I don't really know what they did in India, actually. I never, I was a kid, so. Mm-hmm. But they brought me home the Mahabharata comic books and some little trinkets from India. And you can get the identical trinkets in the marketplace in India now. And I always get a little excited. They have these like sandalwood pens, and they smell really good. They don't write really well, but they're like carved sandalwood. And I had this little book holder that was like these two, made out of some type of carved Indian wood, and it was 2 unicorns, so 70s. And I would put my books in there. And I liked everything about it, and I was attracted to it. And she brought a book home from India, which there weren't many American yoga books in 1979. I guess I was 7 years old. And basically, like, the book was a book of asana for children. And they had all the names of the poses were mostly animals, because they are actually. So Matsya Asana, the fish, and they showed a boy, and he was just wearing like a little, what's called a kopin, which is like a loincloth.
Okay.
And they showed him when he was doing a back bend, and he was really stiff, and then like 1 year later, and he was really flexible. And so
all it takes is a year?
When you're 7, it takes a minute.
It takes a minute, yeah.
But I wanted to try it, so I would take out the book and I would go onto this. We had this like big long porch on the side of our house, and I would I don't think we even had yoga mats. I didn't have a yoga mat or anything, and I would open up the book and I would try the asanas, and then my mom taught me the whole sun salutation, so I would try doing the sun salutations to play. It was like what I was doing to play. And then the woman, there was another ashram woman who lived right across the street, really, and she had a harp, and she played the harp. And I've since met her again at a Krishnadas thing. She's like, "Are you the little girl who used to come take flute lessons?"
That's awesome.
I said yes. So she, so the flute teacher came, the neighborhood flute teacher came from the ashram, and she would give lessons there. So I started to take flute lessons with this woman, and I was really into it. And
that's how you got into music originally?
It was like I wanted to play any instrument I could get my hands on. So I don't know why flute. I think just because possibly the flute teacher lived across the street. So my mom was like, "You can get a flute, you can walk across the street." So I liked the instrument too. And so I started to take flute lessons with her, and then after some time, she
you can hear
after some
clacking
time
in the
I had to
background,
then ride my bike up to the ashram with my flute.
Okay.
And I liked that in the ashram there were all these sort of pictures of divinity, and I would wait for my lessons and I would look at the pictures. And I realize now that the place that I saw this kind of like where I had my youthful spiritual awakening was not in the ashram. I was thinking it was, but I remember now it was in the woman Pat Fogel's laundry room. She had a picture of Krishna's universal form, which was hanging over her dryer. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing it and just being like, what is that? Who is that? And really wanting to, just feeling like a total connection. And then she had, this is such a funny story, but then she had paved her driveway, which was like super fancy. I mean, she was the child, she was from the family of, she was from some wealthy family, and that's how she could just sort of be an ashram lady and go to India. But she paved her driveway, which was really fancy at that time in Greenville, New York. And
where is Greenville, New York?
Well, it was a town called South Westerlo. It's in Greene County, which is sort of...
Okay, I know where Greene County...
Near Catskill.
That's like Hunter Mountain is in Greene County,
yeah, but
right?
it's down at the bottom of the mountain.
Gotcha, okay.
So if you were to go down like Route 23, and then you kind of take a left at the bottom of the hill, you'd find yourself in Greenville eventually.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. So I would roller skate there, because roller is the 70s, right? Roller skating was the thing.
You're not doing that on gravel.
But I would ask my mother to roller skate there, and I would roller skate past the window of her laundry room so I could look at the picture of the universal form. So it was like a kid darshan. It was like this something. And she had also, like, her house was all decorated in like an ashram. Everything was saffron, shades of saffron, and she had a meditation room, and she had tablas. She played the tablas. And I was like totally drawn to that and fascinated by that and wanted to immerse myself in that. And so I was just, so from that time, so I did yoga when I was 7, starting when I was 7.
Cool. Started when you're 7. I wish I started when I was 7.
Well, unfortunately, I took a big long break when it would have been really helpful to me. But I don't know how many teenagers connect unless their parents don't do yoga, and then they definitely will do yoga. But if your parents do yoga, you want to reject it. Yeah. That's just the process.
Got to rebel. That is the process.
Yeah.
Whatever you do sucks.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm doing the opposite. I don't care what.
Just you wait. You got a couple more years before that kicks in.
Yeah. No, we're starting to see a little bit of it now. Lots of fun, that teenage stuff. So, all right, so grew up connected to yoga, fell away from yoga for a little time, but,
I just didn't, like, we kind of changed. We moved to, when I was for 9th grade, we moved over and I went to Waldorf school, and, the ashram, we moved away from that place and those people. I still sort of held a strong attraction to going. I always wanted to go to India. And so, I was but I didn't really like do yoga, and there was no yoga studio in the area, and there was nobody really doing yoga in 1986. It wasn't like popular. I mean, there were, but in New York City and stuff like that. And
not like today where they're everywhere.
Not where it's literally in every town and village.
Yeah.
And so I basically kind of just fell away from that. But when I got, not like, not really with anger or anything, like I'm making it sound like my mom did it, so I'm not doing it.
I might have made it sound
and then in college, even as a freshman in college, I started to kind of like become a seeker again. And one of the first things I did was I met my friend Ian from high school. He had lived in India as a child, and his mother was a disciple of someone named Takar Singh. And so I went, so his mom and dad were going to be in town with the meditation teacher, and they invited me to come up to this church on the Upper West Side and do the meditation. It was called Meditation of Light and Sound. So I was like, all right, I'll try it out. But in the middle of all of that, there was the whole punk rock phase of my life, which didn't really end ever. But within that, it's really confusing if you're trying to describe this to their average person, but if you're from that world, this has been part of it. Within that world, there was a whole sort of subsect of people that were really into spiritual life of different varieties, but particularly Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And later, really, we never did asana in the ashram, but I was sort of like seeing that in the hardcore scene and seeing like the Krishnas would come and like give out food, and I was like kind of noticing that, and I knew this band called the Cro-Mags, and they had a picture of, it came from the Srimad Bhagavatam on their album, which was called Age of Quarrel, and I would like look at that and think, what does this mean? And my friend, who I married later, so moved into the ashram. He and Raghunath moved into the ashram together. Raghunath's another yoga teacher that pretty much everybody knows. So they were on tour, and they got a Bhagavad Gita, and they went and stayed at an ashram, and they, it was kind of all just sort of filtering into our awareness, not super consciously. So I went to meet them. I went to meet Steve, my husband, and Raghunath at the temple one time. And when I did, everything from my childhood came like flooding back to me. And it was like something that was very real and fundamental to who I was opened up again. And I thought, it just sort of sparked my awareness of like, this is, when you're kind of looking for yourself in the teenage years, it sparked my remembrance and awareness of that, and I started to sort of turn myself slowly back in that direction. It took some time, but It was then, yeah.
Let's talk about the rock and roll, the punk rock. So I just...
Like, how does that work?
I thought it was the coolest thing.
It makes no sense.
When I first met you, and I put that post up on Facebook about, put some music up, video, whatever, and then you didn't say anything. You just put the video up, right? And I'm watching the video, and I'm
like, what?
And I'm like, hold on, this yogi just sent me this link to this like hard thrash metal, like I don't even know what I would call it, but it was heavy stuff, right? And I'm like, and then I'm watching the video, I'm like, well, there must be something like in here, so I'm watching it. I'm like, wait a minute, is that her? And that's when I was like, and you're playing guitar, like, holy shit! I'm like, she's playing like this music. I'm like, it was such a opposite end of the spectrum from my experience anyway. So I thought that was really cool.
I know, because people always, like, now most people know me, and I mostly teach yin yoga, right? Largely, which wasn't always what I did, but it's like really quiet. It's really still. I don't say anything. I say hardly anything. But today, actually, in class, I was thinking about, there was this really good documentary on Netflix, and I can't remember, I'm not recalling the name right now, but it's about Sufi music. And it's shucks, I just can't remember the name. But anyway, if you Google or put on in your Netflix search bar Sufi music documentary, it'll come up. But they show this practice of the zikr, which is like when people gather and they chant this divine names, and it's like the most punk rock expression of spirituality. They're like playing these drums, and their bodies are like swaying, and they're so fully immersed. And I thought, oh, okay, it's starting to connect for me in another way. I mean, it always connected for me because within the hardcore music was this just to explain it to you, which is good because usually whenever I'm doing this, I'm doing a podcast for hardcore people and they're like, yeah, we know, dude, shut up.
Right.
But it was a total reaction to whatever every other thing that was happening in American culture. We were doing the opposite. And so it sounds funny, but we were even committing ourselves to being straight edge. And straight edge meant not eating meat, not drinking, not taking any drugs. And actually the last part, which I think maybe less people didn't take as seriously, was not being promiscuous, which was like basically the tenets of becoming a monk.
Right.
And we were like, I was like shaved
and certainly
head,
the opposite
and, like,
of being a punk. Like,
yeah,
I think Sid Vicious when I hear punk music.
Right,
you know
and people think of that, but there was that component, and then we were even rejecting that. We were like, really, how different is that? Because my dad gets wasted on the weekends or whatever. Not my dad exactly,
right.
but people's dads are, so we were just thinking like, what would be actually the thing that would like fuck with people the most? And I can tell you that it fucks with your parents even when they're like, why are you not getting drunk as a teenager? They're
why are
like,
you not exhibiting destructive behavior?
They're like confused by it. It actually freaked people out. And I remember going to parties in high school and the parents at the parties were like freaked out that I wasn't like getting drunk with the other teenagers. They were more freaked out by that than thinking their kids were going to like wrap their car around a tree. It like totally, it was such a mind fuck for people.
Yeah.
And even within the scene. So once you go that far into what turns out to be action in sattva, action in the mode of goodness, then other things just start to like open up for you. And I do have to credit really John Joseph, who's a friend of mine from the Cro-Mags. I mean, he found out about vegetarianism from the Bad Brains, who were a Rasta band. So they're like this amazing punk rock Rasta band. And they were practicing, ahimsa, vegetarianism. And he found out about it. And he was just like, this never even occurred to me. And then he loved eating the itals, which is like curry. Mm-hmm. And then he found out that you could eat that at the temple. And then he started to go to the temple to eat. And then he sort of never left the temple, which is true for a lot of us, how we kind of got into it. So he was the one that would bring the Krishnas and they would like give free food. Now, all punks of every variety like free food.
Right. Who doesn't like free food?
Who doesn't like free food? And that free food is actually considered to be, it's blessed. It's called prasad. Prasad means mercy or grace, and they offer the food to Krishna and then they feed it to you, and it's considered to be like infused with spirituality. So there we were, not drinking, not eating meat, eating this spiritually infused food, and attempting, really, I think it's kind of a radical notion that we haven't nailed yet as a society, but having relationships with each other where we weren't just objectifying one another. Mm-hmm. So that's actually quite radical. And then we were also blowing our ears out with
really loud music.
The loud music was, for me, required because there was so much frustration and pent-up anger about all of the expectations that were like on all of us. And so there was something about that was like this total like, like Lord Shiva does the Tandava dance, which is like the dance of destruction. And so I think for us, it was really about that. It was about like breaking every barrier completely down. And also there's another component, which is like if you study Buddhism and other moksha traditions, even Yoga Sutras, it says everything is suffering, everything is frustration. So it only makes sense that that's a great starting place for spiritual life. So it says, Sarvam Dukkham, means the first of the Four Noble Truths is everything is suffering. So punks got that. They didn't actually get confused that the material world might have something to offer. They already rejected it. It was already Sarvam Dukkham. We got that. Now, if you do that long enough, and you don't go to the second of the Four Noble Truths, or you don't progress past the Sarvam Dukkham part of, Sarvam means everything, and Dukkham means exactly what it sounds like. Dukki is the English word. Everything is suffering, or everything is frustrating. So eventually, after some years of blasting your ears out and smashing your bodies into people, which I didn't do that much, but everybody else did, and just being generally angry and doing things just to mess with people, like your parents a little bit, you kind of go like, and now what? Punk rock never answered that. Hardcore music started to have ideas. So a lot of people that were from that scene became like vegan chefs, organic farmers, meditation teachers. There's a whole group, the whole Dharma punks, all those people come from the punk scene. And, eventually there was like ideas of like, what, now what? And so I think that's why I turned back to yoga. It was sort of sitting there on the back burner waiting for me. And because at that time, so many of the kids from the hardcore scene were all moving into the temple, it was just easy. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty fun, actually. If getting up at 3:30 a.m. and doing chanting and meditation till 9:30 a.m. is fun, then it's fun. But it was for me. And we were like cultured for austerity, because being hardcore requires like a lot of austerity. Like you had to like stand on the freezing sidewalk outside of CB's because some band was playing that you absolutely had to see, or you drove like 500 miles because some band was playing and coming from Toronto or something that you had to see. So we were like cultured to like almost pilgrimage. It's like not really different from pilgrimage. Later when I went to Indian pilgrimage, I was like, I got this. It was something familiar to me. So like a lot of the sort of cultural behaviors, if you could say, of hardcore people mirror those of Bhakti pilgrims. It's hard.
It's fascinating.
It's fascinating, right?
It really is, yeah. There's that whole it's funny because when I came into the yoga community, not under, like, I went with the stereotype, right? Like, that's what was in my mind for yogis. So then all of a sudden I get into it a little deeper and I start meeting people like you or like Raghu or any of these guys, any of you guys that were like,
there's
it's
a lot of us.
Polar opposites, right? And then I find out there's like, there's like,
and we still
tons of people that were like in this crazy scene, and they're like these super high spiritual yogis, and doing amazing things. And
well, in that scene too, everyone from that scene, I would not say everyone, but like a huge amount of people, like way more than the average the average amount of people in the average population were like self-starters. So when you're like, I started being in bands when I was like at the end of 8th grade, and now looking at 8th graders, I think, wow, that was pretty radical. I played shows when the summer between 8th and 9th grade. I was 14 years old. I like sang in this little hardcore band called All Fall Down. No, sorry, it was even before All Fall Down. It was called Last Action.
You were in 8th grade in a hardcore band.
Yeah, I was in a hardcore band, and we set up a show. Like we booked a show. Like we were like, I don't think we got paid, but but the thing was, we were not afraid to like. Usually, you think like, let's start a band, and like no one really does it, but we really did it. Mm-hmm. Like we were like, let's start a band. Let's pick up an instrument. I'm gonna go get an instrument, and then I'm gonna learn to play. I'm gonna teach myself. None of us like took music lessons or anything, and then we just started bands, and then we would like set up tour. We would record demos and set up tours. I did all of this by the time I was like in 10th or 11th grade. I'd already been in like multiple hardcore bands and
So
played
funny.
shows all over. Yeah,
I was in a band in
See, you were
7th grade.
Nice.
6th grade. It was called Spick and Jippies.
We might have to make shirts for that.
Spick and Jippies. Yep. None of us could play our instruments, but we had instruments. We would make noise come out of them.
See, you were punk rock. You just didn't know
and
you were.
That was we were all skaters. We're all skateboarders.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
skaters
like
are
12,
in the
13.
same. But skaters are in that same thing. They're like, we need even like now they're like, we need a skate park. So, we're going to go actually lobby the city of Albany, and they're going to build us a damn skate park. And they did it.
Yeah.
But if not, in the meantime, we're taking over the tennis courts, and we're going to build shit, and we're going to leave it there. And
people are going to be upset with us.
But we're going to show up, and every time they kick them off, they just come back. They're like cockroaches or something, but like really awesome ones.
We're going to take a quick break. I just got to rest the equipment here, and we'll be right back.
Got to rest the equipment?
Rest the equipment.
How tired does it get?
Awesome. Sorry.
Yeah, you can direct me toward more direction if you want.
No, I think it's great. Well, you know what I do want to, before we get into some of the other, there's two of
Let's just talk about the teacher training.
We want to talk about teacher training, but I want to talk about, you're still in the hardcore scene.
Yeah.
So
as you can tell, look at me, I'm so pumped.
Oh my God, I love it. I think it's great. let's just talk about that real quick. So
okay, yeah.
You're playing with, or you play with on occasion.
I play with 108.
108.
Yeah.
Okay. And didn't you hop on a plane recently, go to England to do a gig with those guys or something like that?
Yeah. So I was in 108. I started being in 108 when I lived at the Philadelphia Temple, and then we did some tours, and then I had my daughter, so it was not happening. And then I just was so not in the energy of 108, pretty much, because I was a mother and
Sure.
I had babies, and it just doesn't loan itself to any type of being in a band. So they kept playing shows and stuff like that. And then about 3 years ago, they were coming. The guitar player, whose name is Raj Kishore, or his name's Vic, he lives in Japan, and he was writing his memoir of being in 108, and he started to contact me for details and talk about what that was about. And we connected again. And he's like, you should come play with us. We're playing some shows. And I was like, I don't know. I don't really play guitar anymore. He's like, just come. So he kind of convinced me. So I'm like, I don't even own a guitar or an amp. He's like, just come. So I drove to New Jersey, and I was like, oh my God, this is insane. And I wasn't thinking. I was just wearing yoga pants, and I was wearing flip-flops. This is part of the story. So then I just showed up at the show, and they had a guitar for me, and I literally went into the backstage with them and just played through some songs. I had picked up my guitar, and I actually rebought the album on iTunes and was playing with knowing the songs I'm playing along. And I was like, I think I remember how to do this, and I just sat in the backstage with them, and then I just literally walked out on stage and plugged in no rehearsal and just played with them. And I had to be barefoot because I didn't have my shoes weren't appropriate for punk rock, I guess.
Can't wear flip-flops on a punk rock stage.
So it was just really funny. It was just this really funny coming back home sacred temple experience. I was barefoot. I had these giant ankle bells on, and and we played, and I was fully back into it. It was complete muscle memory. And so, and then I did that show. And then the next day I played this show in Brooklyn, and that's the video I sent you. And I was like, you know what? I need to do this again. And so they actually went on and played some shows in California, which I didn't. But then they were like, do you want to do this with us whenever we play again? And I was like, I do. It was something that, it was an authentic piece of myself that was still totally intact.
Yeah. And
totally made sense to me. And I felt like it was something that was really missing for me. So now when we're playing, we had a song called, or we have an album called Songs of Separation, which if you know anything about Bhakti, the concept of separation from Krishna is at the heart of everything. So interestingly enough, we were these teenager ashram dwellers, punk rockers that really understood a lot of the kind of deeper philosophical and esoteric aspects of Krishna philosophy. And we wrote a hardcore record about it. Somehow it worked. Somehow it worked. Yeah. And so we have these two shows in Brooklyn and in November, and we booked one of them, and then it sold out in a day, and then we booked another one, and I was like, oh, we are relevant, we have a relevant thing. And there's actually so many people now that write to me or contact me or send me messages that are you saved my life. I was totally messed up, and then I got into spiritual life, and or people that I've known forever that are I never told you this, but Songs of Separation was the most important record to me of my whole life. And I was like, oh, you should have told me that, dude. Right. I had no idea that it was so relevant, So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. I think it's an amazing thing. The story.
Yeah, and the guys are all, here's a little interesting fact that you might enjoy since you're a music person. The band that Vraj, our guitar player, and who's the musical genius behind 108, if 108 has musical genius, which I think it does, and he's writes a lot of the lyrics and stuff. He's a Vedic astrologer. Before he was in 108, before he was a devotee, he was in a band called Inside Out, and the singer of that band was Zach De La Rocha.
Okay.
So Zach went on and formed Rage Against the Machine, and then we did 108. But when we were in the first tour that we did when we were in Salt Lake City, Zach lived there, and he came and sang with us at the height of Rage Against the Machine. Yeah, so it was cool. I mean, we knew him from the hardcore scene, so for us, he was Zach, but it was kind of cool. I thought you might enjoy that story.
It is, yeah.
It's cool, right?
It is cool.
Yeah, because he was a sound revolutionary, so in his way, a sacred sound revolutionary also. So people from that world just like did amazing things. Yeah. Actually.
Well.
And continue to do it, actually. It's quite a community.
That's very cool.
Yeah. Lots of yogi, yoga hardcore people crossover, much more than people realize. Yeah.
Well, funny, yoga people have lives when they're not in the studio, apparently. Yeah, exactly. As it turns out. So
they're not all hippies. Like
they're
my
not
mom.
just in a cave.
Nope.
So let's talk about the teacher training program. So you are leading. Well, you do a lot of different types of teacher trainings.
Yeah.
You also run the program at Yoga Mandali in Saratoga Springs, which I don't have firsthand knowledge of the program, but I'm told it's amazing by quite a few people. I have video of people saying it's amazing.
Yeah.
Change your life, actually. So tell us about the program itself at Mandali. Let's start there.
Okay. So I work with Heather Mann, and she's Heather Dacus. She has 2 last names. She's also my partner in not crime. What's the opposite of crime?
Good doings.
My partner in good doings and deeds at Yoga Mandali, and in fact I have a staff of amazing people that come and teach there, and I'm going to say who they are because will tell you what's happening also. So Nini Gridley, who teaches all of the chakra systems, and she is really one of the foremost scholars and practitioners of chakra yoga. She knows everything about it. Like, you can hardly find someone that knows more about it and is more dedicated to that.
Bala was calling her the chakra guru.
She is the chakra guru, and she is so... her awareness around it and her awakening around it is inspirational, and it's amazing. And then Anne Bassetti, who is a PhD, she's a psychologist, and she also teaches all of the kind of the yoga of how to be loving and appropriate with your yoga students from this day forward, which is really important in the Bhakti tradition. It says in the Bhakti Sutras that never think all of the rules of Dharma don't apply to you. So she breaks it down for us and teaches us that, and also runs an amazing restorative yoga training. And she's like completely brilliant. And she wrote a book called Befriending Your Body, which everybody should have, and is just kind of a self-starter and quite genius in what she does. And we have Edwin Bryant, who is a professor at Rutgers and was a lecturer at Harvard Divinity School. And he was a graduate student at Columbia University when I met him, when I stomped my boots uptown and was like, oh, I could have been an academic, but Warzone is playing. I need to get my stomping boots back downtown. I joke about that now. I was like, what if I just took those boots off and went into academia? But I don't think I really had it in me. But so he teaches Yoga Sutras, and he is the translator of the Yoga Sutras. So in my opinion, he is the best teacher of the Yoga Sutras. Sure. And a lot of people agree with me on that. And those are the main sort of teachers that come in. And we have also Balaram Chandra, who comes in and teaches Ayurveda. But we have this amazing staff of people, and the reason I wanted to do that was because, I should mention that Heather is a doctor, an MD doctor type of a doctor, not just a PhD.
Not just a PhD. I don't know what any of that means, but it sounds.
So when
impressive.
She's teaching anatomy, she really knows it.
She gets it
really well, and she's also a very refined and very kind of amazing teacher. Not just that she understands it, but she's really good at bringing it. So I think we have a staff of people that bring this sense of authenticity and yoga roots. We tried to actually call the training Roots of Yoga, but there were already like 500 Roots of Yogas.
Oh yeah,
so we didn't take it. So Bhakti Marg means path. So Bhakti Marg means the path of Bhakti. Yeah. I kind of wanted to call it Prema Bhakti Marg, which means the highest path of Bhakti. Anyway, that's another story. So basically, like, the training will, when you graduate from the training, you will be able to beautifully teach an asana class. And my hope is that you will also be awakened to a lifetime of study of all the different aspects of the yoga tradition, and that none of those are lost to you. You're not thinking that yoga is just asana, which it clearly is not. Mm-hmm. From every sacred text in the Yoga Sutras, it just says yoga should be practiced comfortably and with ease. It doesn't say anything else about asana. So if we're going back to that original question of what is yoga, I'll answer it like this. In the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali Yoga, he says yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind. That's one type of yoga. If you then read the Gita, Krishna says there's this type of yoga, Patanjali Yoga, which is the one you remember. I'll now introduce to you the ones that have been lost. So everybody at that time in India really understood, okay, yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind, the yoga of the sages or the sadhus. So then Krishna says it is also karma yoga. It's working in the world, doing good deeds in the world. And actually, if anyone's interested, you can watch a little YouTube of Tulsi Gabbard describing this, because they ask her, what is your relationship to Bhakti Yoga? And she answers. It's quite good, actually. So karma yoga means selfless service. And it says that selfless service is unlike any other action. So karma means action, but unlike any other action in the material world, selfless service doesn't make new karma. It's like karma free. And so it's considered to be karma yoga. It's like if you were to do anything else in the material world that's not karma yoga, you plant a seed, which then has to fructify, which plants another seed, and it just makes the cycle of samsara indefinite. But karma yoga is different. It starts to end the cycle of samsara, which is one of the goals of all of the, you could say moksha traditions, the liberation traditions. And then it goes on further and says, but even higher than that is Bhakti Yoga. And Bhakti Yoga is the relationship between the living entity and the Supreme Self. So between people and divinity, you could say. And so those are all types of yoga. And there is a chapter in the Gita which talks very specifically about Patanjali Yoga, which is the 7th chapter. And it's beautiful, and it says the yogi's mind is like a candle in a room that is windless. So it's completely steady. So having taught yoga for now 15 years and done yoga since I was a kid, I see that without all of the pieces, it's pretty hard to pull off, because it's nice to have the idea of doing karma yoga, but if your mind is really disturbing, then it's impossible. Mm-hmm. And it's really nice to do the practices of kirtan and all of the ecstatic practices of bhakti. But if your mind is totally disturbed, and then we have to dial it back even one more, because we're in America, right? So we sit in chairs all day and look at computers and drive in cars. And so we actually do have to deal with the body. And that, one could say, is the yoga of Kashmiri Shaivism, which I was talking about this morning, where one sees the body as being made of like this. There's no separation between Prakriti and Purusha in that tradition of just seeing the body as like dancing particles of radiance, and that you're exploring the movement of prana through the body and the subtle channels of the body, and then also the subtle bodies. And this is a line from the Yoga Sutras, which everyone should come to next year. You need to come to that.
I'm going.
Got it.
I'm doing
Edwin's.
We're gonna make it happen.
Edwin's freaking Yoga Sutras is the best.
All right.
But there's a line that says the yogi's field of mastery is like the total universe, but it's also every single cell. So I really think that that's one of the reasons why Americans associate, and Europeans, and probably now a lot in India too, because the countries keep feeding each other. Unfortunately, right now, India is getting a lot of misinformation from the West, whereas like when I went there 20 years ago, people were still very like situated in the mode of goodness, and there was like so much sacred spirituality. Now it's like YouTube. Now it's like Baby Shark or whatever thing is popular. Everybody knows,
or whatever it is. Yeah.
But
you're welcome.
So I think that asana is really important because our bodies have to be comfortable enough so we can sit still enough to deal with the mind. And then we can, with that stillness, we can study the sacred scriptures, which is like the Swadhyaya part, like the study of, one of the niyamas. And then from that study, we find out, karma yoga is so beneficial. And also you don't make new karma. It's yoga. Karma yoga is yoga, like you were saying. And then you finally kind of get to this place of what is Bahkti Yoga, and that's the chanting. And we do find now there's all this science. Like, I never care about science, but people love science. Science says...
I love the word science. Yeah.
Science!
It's instant credibility, science.
Science says that they've studied the brain waves of people from chanting, and it produces that stillness that Patanjali is talking about. So science, hashtag science.
Science, hashtag science.
Well, it speaks of our whole, like, why we have a hard time accepting Bhakti Yoga, like, as Western people, because we don't know, but we're completely brainwashed. Not the correct way. We didn't wash our brain.
Plus that word devotion, all that devotion stuff.
Devotion.
Like, what do you mean?
We're brainwashed by European Enlightenment, which placed more emphasis and value on rational thinking and science rather than trans-rational experience. And so the ancients were really into trans-rational experience, and like they saw the whole universe, and they were like awakened to all kinds of things. And now we're like, can you measure it?
Can you measure?
Can you measure it? Does it fit in a beaker? And
funny.
I think we're kind of like, first of all, we're finding, because a lot of Indians are scientists and they're studying this nicely. Thank you very much. There's like this coming together of these two things, and Western scientists as well. And they're seeing, meditation really does affect the brain. You can measure that. So now people are like, okay, it must be good.
And now it's relevant, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
It gives some legitimacy.
Yeah.
It's okay. As long as, however people get into it and love it, what's the difference?
Right. Well, yeah, that's the question, right? Like, so, one of the things that we're trying to do with this podcast is to answer the question, what is yoga? And my belief, and I think I've said this on all 3 episodes now, but is that it really matters who the person is. Like, it's going to be different
Absolutely.
for everybody, right? And so you can't give definition to what yoga is for someone else. Or like, I don't think that you should try to do that.
Well, it's so varied.
Right.
So even within the tradition, you could say there's, and that's why there is this concept. I always say this, that this concept does come from Yoga Sutras, but this idea of Ishta-Devata. Ishta-Devata means divinity, just how it manifests to you as an individual, and it's right there. So you don't have to, and just imagine what a different world it would be if you were like, you think Jesus is God. You think, you call God Allah. Like, cool. There's no okay, let's have a war.
Yeah, people think it's so upset about
so
it.
just imagine if we all just accepted Ishta-Devata, and I think yoga has that same thing. Like, for some people, and honestly, 99% of people wouldn't just come for, well, this is shifting, but they wouldn't have stepped foot in a yoga studio to just meditate. Or the asana part is so important. And I think there's another part of asana too, which is that of all the types of exercise you can do, it's the most conducive for later becoming a meditator because it's sattvic movement. There's not, it has to have a tiny bit of rajas because any type of movement has rajas, but versus like kickboxing or something. I think kickboxing is awesome too. I think some people you need to expend rajas, but like, it's just like Ayurveda, like Balaram Chandra was talking about. One man's something is another, one man's trash is another man's treasure. I don't think that's what he said, but
he says, but something along those lines.
Something like poison is, medicine.
Yeah.
So for some people, the body is completely sacred to them, and I've seen people that usually those people that come to the yoga trainings who really have realization of that, they are already physical therapists or they're nurses or doctors.
Right.
So they have this relationship to the body where it's completely divine and sacred. And so within the body, like in that verse I was reading this morning, where all temples, all sacred sites, all pilgrimages can take place in the body, for them asana might be the primary path. For some people, meditation is the primary path. For some people, they do a little yoga, but they really want to go and work at the homeless shelter because for them, their sacred practice is serving humanity. And then for some people, they just travel from kirtan to kirtan to kirtan, and then they're like, are you really going to another kirtan? And they're like, later, skater, you know. So I mean, but I see most, you know, people have like a combination of that, and just like in Ayurveda, like the balance of what nourishes you is going to be a little different for every single living entity. Same for yoga. So I always like at the beginning of the Bhakti Marg yoga training on the first weekend, we ask people to write for themselves what yoga is. And then they begin to formulate their yoga teaching sort of propensity based on the definition that they themselves give it. Like, what is it for them? And there's a huge sort of self-love, self-help component that I think is crucial, because I don't know if this is true everywhere, but I know in this country we're just like walk around with self-loathing at being like the driving principle of our lives, and it's so debilitating that people spend years of their lives just getting to that place where they show up feeling like their body is okay, feeling like they're, you know, and that I think is, you know, in some ways been one of the most beneficial things about it for me, if I'm perfectly honest. And then, like, you know, you're not going to really get into like high states of meditation when you're like, oh God, I'm such a loser, but you're really not. Right. You're really not, you know. And I mean, I'm joking about it, but there's literally debilitating aspect of sort of the fear and self-loathing that we have in our bodies. We do have that. Yeah. Hopefully we can start to like dissolve that. It says we can. It says we can. Yoga says we can dissolve that.
Yoga says we can do it.
Yoga says we can move past that. And yoga says that our breath is the sacred feminine who's walking us through that path, walking us down that path, if we just remember.
If we just remember.
If we just remember, yeah. So yoga means remembrance of all of those things. And we show up again and again and again because we have like the muscle memory of forgetfulness. Did I tell you anything about the yoga training? Should I talk more about that specifically, maybe?
No, you did fine on the yoga training. And I like how it rolled right in. I mean, this is the best podcast yet because I haven't had to say a thing. So, no.
It's like I just got out of solitary confinement.
I love it. No, listen, it's amazing. It's awesome stuff. So is it a recent thing, your whole Bikram stuff that you got going on? Did I just hear you talking about like
going to hot yoga?
You've been going to hot yoga a lot lately?
Yeah. I do it for Priya Simha.
Okay. Hey, listen, I'm not here to judge why you do it.
She's my girl.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who teaches that style of yoga, so she invited me to her class. Actually, we talk about this. Sometimes you just start down a road because you want to be with a certain teacher. So I've known her for years. She actually used to work for us. She went to Saratoga Waldorf School, and she's like a martial artist, and she became a yoga teacher. And I started hanging out with her a little bit, and she was like, you should come to my hot yoga class. And it was really cold out, so I did. And I felt like I do so much cooling yoga and so much of that now, and I needed a little more fire in my practice, so I started to go to her yoga classes sort of on a whim, and then I was like, this is what I need right now. I don't think I'll do it in the hot months because I think it's too hot. Yeah. But it helped me survive the winter. And also it's the very opposite of every other type of yoga I do, because it's really martial and it's really linear and it's really still and it's really hot. And I always like doing this flowing, like full body pranic flow movement things. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is kind of good for me just to do the sort of opposite action of what I normally do. So I think that's how I got into it. Plus, she's a badass.
She's a badass.
She's such a badass. So I like to wake up and see like a little like a Instagram post of my yoga teacher doing knuckle push-ups in the snow. That really works for me. Plus, she's like a hardcore girl, so we have that in common, and we started to hang out. Yeah.
Yeah, that hardcore thing is just.
I love it. She's got bulldog tattooed on her neck, and I'm like, where can I take this class? I need that class.
I need that class. All right, so we got just a couple of minutes left. Let's just do some quick questions. If you were going to recommend one book, what would it be? I know.
That's a torture question.
It is, right? It's like
Bahkti Yoga by Edwin Bryant.
Okay.
Has so much information if you're interested at all in any type of yoga. It's a long read, but it contains so many different parts of yoga. I think it's worth reading.
Okay. All right. Bhakti Yoga by Edwin Bryant. Let's see. I think some of these have already been answered. What's your craziest yoga story? You must have some crazy yoga stories. What's your craziest yoga story?
Okay, here's my craziest yoga story. I happened to be at the temple, and then I was going to sing for Pattabhi Jois's memorial service when he left the planet. So I walked over wearing a sari because it was what I was in, and when I arrived, it was at Donna Karen's house in New York City, and when I arrived, they just assumed I was somebody because I was wearing a sari and for no other reason, and they whisked me up the stairs, and when I got, I didn't know, I thought I was going to the thing, and when I got up there was like a circle of really famous yoga teachers all gathering and holding hands, and I just like went with it, and it was like Sharon and David and like Colleen Sedman and Rodney Yee and Dharma Mitra, and I just like got in the circle because I was like, all right, I'm not going to tell them like, no, I don't belong here.
Was your head like trying not to blow off your shoulders because you were just like, oh my God, I'm standing
Yeah, it was a little crazy. I was just like, I'm going with this. And then I did chant. I chanted with Gauravani after. I mean, I was meant to chant at it, but I don't think I was meant to be on Donna Karen's roof, like rooftop garden in Manhattan, but I did it.
Yeah.
I was like, for once, being a Hare Krishna got me in the door instead of having me kicked out.
Thrown out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right. How about 2 more quick questions? No, actually, last question is, who's a yogi you think I should interview on this podcast?
Meg Allen.
Meg Allen. Okay.
Meg Allen owns Jai.
Oh, okay.
And she is one of the most empowered women that I've met in the yoga scene. It's just supernatural. She's like a Shakti Ma. She's like, here's what's happening. And she's funny and lighthearted, and I think she would be great. I think she's fabulous. And she and her husband also own Dead President's Lounge.
I know. We have a few mutual friends. So
Tattooed Yogis.
Yeah.
You could interview both of them.
Yeah.
But you asked me for one, so
right.
I went for girl power.
All right, we'll do it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So grateful. And I'm not sure who we have on next week. We're still working that out, but yeah.
Exciting. Thank you.
Exciting.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.